In this video, I'm going to show you 5 ways to sharpen using Affinity Photo. Okay, let's start with Unsharp Mask. This is the most commonly used form of sharpening and probably the most well known. And it's quite straightforward and easy to use. So let's get stuck in. First we'll duplicate our layer by right-clicking on the layer and selecting duplicate. We'll work on this top layer so that we can use it for comparison a bit later. Select filters and sharpen and Unsharp Mask to bring up our Unsharp Mask dialog. And let's just zoom in a bit so that we can see what we are doing. The first thing I tend to do when using Unsharp Mask is to select the factor slider and move it up to about halfway. The factor is the amount of sharpening. Next, I slowly bring up the radius slider until I think I have enough sharpening. Now, I don't want to go too far because you end up with this weird crunchy look. You want to go just far enough so that it looks natural. Slowly bring up the radius, just slowly adjust. I think that's too much and that's too little, so about there. Let's just zoom out a bit, that's fine. Now just bring down the factor until the sharpening just starts to disappear, like so. It's just started to disappear. See, we have sharpening and now it's a little blurry, so we bring it up until it's just sharp. You really don't want to over sharpen, just set the factor until it's just sharp. Next we have our threshold. The threshold works with contrast. The lower the contrast between the adjacent pixels, then the lower the threshold. As we bring up the threshold slider, what we're actually saying is not to sharpen until the adjacent pixels are far enough away from each other in luminosity. Or if they're too close to each other in brightness, then don't sharpen them. As we raise the slider, slowly but surely, things are not being sharpened. Normally I leave this at 0. If I bring it up a little bit, you can see it's sharpening here, but it still has sharpening here and here, where we have contrast between the colours. So when using threshold, remember to bring it up nice and slowly. I'm going to set it to 0 because I want to sharpen everything. Good, that all seems fine. If we have a good look at our sharpening, just zoom out a little and we can see our skin is sharp, eyelashes are sharp, the iris is very sharp, beautiful. Turn it off and on and off and on. We can see the sharpening works. A bit closer, off and on, and there we have good, effective sharpening. And that's how I sharpen with Unsharp Mask. Here we sharpen the layer directly, but we can also use the Unsharp Mask live filter, which is non-destructive. So if I just delete this layer, just go to delete, to get rid of our sharpening layer, then click the live filter icon and select Unsharp Mask filter. Then I'll do the same on the Unsharp Mask filter. Just make it bigger, increase the factor to 50%, bring up the radius until I've just sharpened enough. I think there is about okay. The eyelashes are sharp, we have sharpening here, and the skin hasn't gone all crunchy. It's rather nice. I won't do the rest, it's just to show you that now our Unsharp Mask is a layer attached to our pixel layer, giving us a completely non-destructive workflow. Very nice, and that is how we use Unsharp Mask. The second method I'm going to show you is to use the high pass filter. First things first, we'll duplicate our layer using Ctrl J. Make sure my layer is selected, then select Filters, Sharpen, High Pass. Now, at the moment we can't actually see anything because we need to change our blend mode. I'll just switch the blend mode to linear light, and next bring our radius down to 0. We can now see we have no sharpening, but if we bring our radius up, then it starts to get sharp. If we go too far, then again we end up with crunchy, horrible graphics. So starting with our radius at 0, we bring it up until we have just enough sharpening. Just enough is enough. And there we have it, sharpening with the high pass filter. Another thing we can do with this is use different blend modes to give us different sharpening effects. Right, let's try a different blend mode. If we change from linear light to, say, overlay, and then bring our radius down, and now bringing it all the way up, you can see it's slowly and progressively getting sharper. Using the overlay mode gives us a much more subtle, softer sharpening than the linear light mode, though we are still getting some slight colour artifacts, especially here. So just bring it down and slowly bring it up until we have just the right amount of sharpening. Let's try another. We could try hard light. Hard light will give us some sharpening, so bring the radius down and slowly bring the radius up to the point where it's just sharpened. Very nice, though I'm going to select linear light. Linear light will be the best one to use for this demonstration because it shows up well and should show up better when the video's gone through YouTube's compression algorithms. So remember, slowly but surely up with the radius, and just enough is definitely enough. And there we go. I'll just hit apply, and now that sharpening is baked into the layer. Okay, let's have a little play, because we have a little trick that we can do with this. We can actually apply this more than once to give us much better fine detail sharpening. We can just sharpen again. Let's just select our background layer and make a copy with Ctrl-J and drag this layer above our previously sharpened layer. Make sure this layer is selected and select Filters, Sharpen and High Pass. Switch our blend mode to linear light, reset our radius, and then if we bring our radius up just a little tad like that, we've now sharpened just the very, very fine detail. There's not a massive difference, it's probably pretty hard to see it on YouTube, but it's there. With 2 layers of sharpening, using the high pass filter, we can perform a general sharpen and then a very, very fine detail sharpen, which can be really effective. So if we just zoom in and turn that layer off, there's a very slight change in the very fine detail. Then if we turn our main sharpening layer off and turn our very fine detail back on, you can see the effect of the very fine sharpening. Now turn our main layer back on, plus our fine sharpening, and we have very fine sharpening without any artifacts, which gives us overall extremely good quality sharpening. As we applied this sharpening directly to duplicated layers, it's now completely baked into those layers. But if we select our layers and delete them, we're back to our original blurry image. Just select Live Filters and High Pass Filter, and then set our blend mode to linear light. Now again, all we have to do is increase the radius until we can just see the sharpening. And there we go, we have our high pass filter sharpening with a live filter. Now you could try having a play with the monochrome button, but to tell you the truth, I don't use it. Let's hit the little cross to get rid of the dialog. Just move our filter above our layer. I can now easily double the amount of sharpening if I want to. All I have to do is duplicate the high pass filter layer, and that will double the amount of sharpening, like so. And we can also use the second layer to do the trick that we did earlier, where we have a tiny radius a really small radius on the second high pass filter for very fine detail. Now we have very good fine sharp detail without artifacts. Beautiful. This method of sharpening that I'm going to show you uses clarity. So to get started, let's use Ctrl J to duplicate our layer. Make sure it's selected. Then go Filters, Sharpen, Clarity. Zoom in a little bit so that we can see what we're doing. And now, as I increase the radius, it gets sharper. Not sharp, sharp. Not sharp, sharp. Don't go too far. If you go too far, you get crunchy artifacts. As clarity is a form of local contrast, if you apply too much, you get local contrast where you don't really want it. And you probably don't want your whole image to look like it's had a lot of clarity applied. So if we get it to just the right point, about there, then clarity can be quite a nice, subtle method of sharpening. Clarity works extremely well for eyes, especially the iris. We can apply that, and there we have it. We have a much more clear and sharp eye. Let's just see without, and with, without, and with. And of course we can use a live filter version. So if we just delete this layer and select live filters and then clarity filter, and as usual slowly increase the radius to apply the clarity sharpening. And if we quickly take a look, turn it off and turn it on, we can see it's there. Pushing it all the way, you can see the whole image is affected. We're ending up with local contrast everywhere. But this actually can be to our advantage. If we make sure our clarity layer is selected and then press Ctrl I to invert it to erase the effect, then select a brush and select white, set our size, make sure our opacity is 100, our flow is 100 and our hardness is quite soft. Now we can paint the clarity back in just to the iris and the pupil. We don't even have to be that accurate with this. Then let's zoom out. Now we have a really dramatic iris and pupil. And as you can see, this is a really great way of doing something really effective with the eyes. It may not be realistic, but it's a technique. All techniques are useful. Part of the toolbox, so to speak. Another method for sharpening in Affinity Photo is to actually use the tone mapping persona. I'll duplicate the layer so that I've got something to compare with. Then make sure our top layer is selected and select the tone mapping persona. Right, so we're in the tone mapping persona, and by default the tone compression is 100%, so we just bring that down to 0 to reset it. That is the only thing that's set by default in the tone mapping. Now all we have to do is scroll down to detail refinement. Detail refinement gives us very nice clean sharpening. So here we go. Bring the amount up to about halfway, and as usual slowly bring up the radius. Not too far, but even if we do go quite far, it really is a very clean sharpen. So we can bring the radius up. Let's just zoom in a little bit and have a play with the radius. I think there, no, that's too far. I think about there. Next, set our amount up high. It's getting a bit crunchy, so bring the amount down and then up slowly, and I think about there is fine. And there we have really nice sharpening using the tone mapping persona's detail refinement. It does a nice job. And if we add a little local contrast, which is very similar to clarity, that will also add sharpening, though it does seem to affect the surrounding skin. And there we have it, sharpening. We have a nice sharp eye using the tone mapping persona. Okay, so saving my favourite until last, here is an excellent method of sharpening, probably the best one that I know, and it actually uses a blur to sharpen. It's like magic. So let's get stuck in. First we'll create a merge layer of everything that we have here. I have my previous image and I've just added a couple of adjustments. For effect, select the top layer and right click, then from the list select merge visible. Now here we have our merge layer. Make sure it's selected, then press Ctrl J twice to create two copies. Now we have two copies of the merged layer. Make sure both of the top layers are selected by clicking on the first one and holding Ctrl whilst clicking on the second one. Now just right click and select group. Now just click on the group which contains the top two merged layers, and then making sure the group is selected, select the blend mode list here and set the group blend mode to overlay. It looks a bit strange, but don't worry about that now. Everything will become clear. Clear, get it? Select the top layer in the group, then press Ctrl I to invert that layer. Next, while the layer is selected, select blend modes and set the blend mode to vivid light. What we have now is the basis for this sharpening method. We just have to add a single filter. We are going to add a filter to our top merged layer. So with our top merged layer selected, go down to Live Filters and select Bilateral Blur Filter. Now the panel is up, so if we zoom in, we can see that it's already done some sharpening. If we set the radius to 0, the sharpening will disappear. All we have to do is slowly increase the radius until we think the image is just sharp. You just have to do it by eye. You'll get used to doing this. I think around 8-ish is about fine. Then our tolerance, we bring it down and slowly bring it up again until we have our sharpening. And I think for this image about 13 is right. You should play around with the radius and tolerance to suit your image. Even if I increase the radius, we get sharpening without much in the way of artifacts. In fact, hardly anything. It's a beautiful method, but I don't need it that sharp. I would like to bring it up, not too very much, just around about there, I think. Just look at that. It gives absolutely beautiful sharpening using the bilateral blur filter. Okay, now we can get rid of that. Let's open it up, and because our bilateral blur is a line filter, we can bring it back up, and if we want to adjust it we can, which is really useful. And so here we have a fantastic halo free, artifact free and clean sharpening method using the bilateral blur filter. Superb! I've created a free macro for the blur sharpen method. This will allow you to instantly apply the method without having to build up all of those layers. First, make sure your library panel is available. If you can't find your library panel in the panels or on your screen, then you will need to enable it. So select View and Studio and then Library, and that will bring up our library panel where we keep our macros. Here are the default ones. We're going to add another one to it. The macro is available by clicking the link in the YouTube description, Once you've downloaded it, just click on this little icon. To bring up these library options, just click on Import Macros. You will have to navigate to the Resources folder which you will have downloaded. Just double click scottwilliamsphotography.af macros and the Sharpen macro will appear in your library. To apply this macro, make sure you have your top layer selected. Because this macro doesn't select the top layer for you, you have to select the layer where you wish the sharpen effect to take place. Then just click Sharpen with Blur. And after just a couple of seconds, it will have activated. If we zoom in, we can see that we have a nice sharp eye. Disable this group, you can see it's not sharp. Enable it and it's sharp. Nice. And as this effect uses a live filter, we can open it up and adjust the radius or adjust the tolerance, adjust to suit our image. And that is how we import and use the free macro.